So with that, I invite the first speaker. Dominic, thank you for coming. We're excited to hear. I saw you on YouTube, so I'm very excited for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Karina, Vishwas, thank you so much for having me here tonight. This is a topic that I'm pretty passionate about, so I'm hoping to start us off with some energy and really looking forward to the rest of the content we're getting from the other speakers as well. Again, my name's Dominic Delmolino. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Accenture's Federal Division. And as part of my role as the CTO for our Federal Division, I take a lot of the technology learnings that we do from Accenture as a global commercial company and distill and present and interpret them for the federal market to see how they apply. And so what I wanted to talk about today is some information that we've gleaned in our research and talking to major corporations around the world about how they're adopting AI. And for me, this is really fascinating because this is one of those opportunities to learn what successful people are doing. And so, and if you've been to some of the DevOps stuff before and you see, what are successful DevOps companies doing, what behaviors do they exhibit, I'm going to share some of that same research with you on the AI side and how some of those behaviors can be interpreted and used both with the Microsoft technologies and in the federal government. So I'm going to hope that I just click. How do I advance the slides? Is it just...
This is AI, so you can just say...
I can just say next, right? Before I got up here, I did say, Cortana, remind me to finish in 20 minutes, right? How many of you use Alexa at home as your timer, right? You're just, please, set 15-minute timer. So we're going to start with artificial intelligence, and I want to talk about moving beyond just the analysis portion of artificial intelligence and getting into the application of it. It really is the case that artificial intelligence has gone kind of exponential. Leading organizations are using AI to transform their organizations, think about different ways to perform the work they do today and different kinds of work they can do in the future by virtue of having these artificial intelligent assistants that help them with their mission. And it's creating completely new operational models. And so one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, is I want to share with you, what are leaders doing that's unique and different? And how can you learn from what they're doing? I'm going to turn this so there we go. How can you learn from what they're doing to take advantage of it in your organization as well? So what we did is we surveyed people who are extremely good at doing AI, and we call this the AIQ. So if you think of an intelligence quotient, this is the artificial intelligence quotient. And we've studied over 200 organizations, and really the ones that are really excelling in this space are not only being inventive and doing unique things from a technology perspective, but they're recognizing that they can really take advantage of an ecosystem of data partners and a larger pool of data to do more with that data in an artificial intelligence realm. And so really what's going on are people that are doing really strong in-house innovation around technology and people, but also bringing to bear not only all the data they have internally, but looking for external partners of pools of data they can use to augment the data they have to make it even better for their AI efforts. So we defined building your artificial intelligence quotient in 3 main areas. And this won't be a surprise. You'll hear this from even some of the other speakers about technology, people, and data, right? And so I'm going to do the same kind of thing here and lay that out for you and talk about how each of these areas really focus in on what's important. But really the one thing I like to highlight the most, and this is kind of my background, is I'm kind of a data nerd from a long time ago. I love playing with data. The focus on data has really given us a new way of training artificial intelligence to understand the world the same way we do in many ways. And so by giving AI large amounts of data and understanding and explaining to our AI algorithms the decisions we've reached on and looking in that large pool of data, the AIs can mimic our process and understand the patterns we've recognized when we make particular decisions. And what's happened is since we have larger and larger pools of data available, many of which are actually highly labeled and highly in a well-constructed way, we can use those pools of data to train AI to do things that we want them to do. I have the speech-to-text sample has stopped working, so this AI agent here has given up the ghost on this machine. Uh-oh, I've broken it.
No.
So let's go back to where I was and talking about data, and we're going to focus on a couple things. The first thing is Chris Anderson from Wired a few years ago mentioned he wrote an article called The End of Theory. And what he was talking about was there's no need to come up with algorithms and rules to figure out what we want to do. We can just observe the data, and the data will tell us what to do. I'm not sure I agree with that approach, but I like the concept of using this data to help us do a better job with figuring out the algorithms we want. And so when we talk about focusing on data, we talk about data that brings value to the problem of solving and working with AI. And the first one we are learning that high performers do is they've identified data partners. They're not just relying on the internal data that they have, but they're looking at external data sources and augmenting and enhancing their internal data with that external data. The government customers I've talked to understand that they sit on a large amount of high quality data that they collect mostly by law in many cases. But many of them have explained to me that even though they're required to collect certain data by law, it doesn't always give all the information they need to make decisions. And so they're looking for data they can use to enrich and correct and augment that data. I spoke to one organization that's responsible for a lot of the maps that people use, and they basically are saying we have errors in our maps, like the street names might be mislabeled, and we're looking for another authoritative data set to bump up against to compare and figure out how to correct our data sets. And so we're working with them to help them understand ways to use AI to overlay the data they have with data from crowd sources, from other external sources, identify disconnects, and see if there's a way to automatically correct some of these errors that they have in their map set, which is really cool. This also brings to bear the idea that we take new data in these new AI algorithms, and how do we give them access to data that might be locked up in legacy systems. So a lot of the approaches I'm seeing people doing are figure out how to unlock data that's in an existing or legacy system, whether that's getting data into a larger data lake so they can integrate data more effectively, or building APIs around legacy systems. It really means they're trying to get access to that data they have. And then lastly, and probably actually very important in this market, is the idea that we want to use data in a responsible way. There are a couple of dimensions of that. Among them, things like respect for PII. How do I teach an artificial intelligence agent to recognize PII, what to do with it, whether to mask it, whether to remember it, whether to forget it, what they should do with it? How do I teach an AI to do things like make sure that the data is representative and isn't biased or skewed in a certain way? I want to make sure that it doesn't favor one gender or another, or favor one race or another. Or how do I make sure the data set I'm working with is balanced and fair? And so that's definitely a thing we talk to our clients about, is responsible and ethical AI, especially with regard to the data sets they're using to train it. There's also the thing is this idea of data convergence. It's not just the fact that I've done a better algorithm that's faster at something, but rather the better data I can use to augment and enhance that algorithm. So can I use data to compare and contrast? Another concept we're exploring with some of our clients is, can I have two different AIs trained on two different data sets debate their answer and see if they come to a better conclusion? The same way humans come to a better conclusion by having diverse points of view and debating what makes sense and coming to a better answer as a result. We're wondering if it's possible to do that with multiple AI agents that are perhaps trained on different data sets from different domains, debate, and then come to a better answer. So I think that's something that's really interesting to explore. Couple things related to data and AI. I talked a little bit about data access and data quality. The important thing here is to make sure if you're going to use data to train AI, make sure that data is verifiable. And what I mean by that is when you present an AI algorithm and its output, the data that was used to train that algorithm is a part of the algorithm itself. And so it's important to keep a pedigree and history of the data that was used, and to understand if people want to validate your algorithm, they may want to look at the data you used to train it. So have that in mind as you try to train AI on the data that you have. Another challenge is, do we have all the data we need? Do we have data in systems that we're missing that we want to pull out and integrate and make sure it's used to fully flesh out the data landscape trained for an AI? And then lastly, the sharing data in a trusted way. I talked about the fact that I want to validate a model by looking at the data you use to train it. And so how do I make sure that my experiment, my algorithm is repeatable? So if I've trained an algorithm to get a certain result, if I tell you, like a scientific paper, the steps I use to do that, can you reproduce my result if I give you the same data? And that's something we want to have in these algorithms, is a reproducible and predictable outcome from when they make decisions. So lastly, just to give you an idea of what Accenture is doing and what Microsoft's doing in this space in the government, particularly from Accenture, what we do is we talk a lot about not only some of the technologies underlying AI, but also some of the aspects around governance and ethics of using AI. So what's an AI governance strategy look like? What decision criteria do you use to understand when is it okay to allow an AI to make a decision? When can I delegate a particular decision to an AI so I feel comfortable that it's making it? How do I ensure that the AI remains compliant on a regular basis, right? I go through compliance training yearly to make sure that I know what I'm doing. How do I ensure that an AI is also being compliant on a regular basis? How do you train people to interact and work with an AI? How do I give someone an AI assistant and help them feel like it's someone they can trust, someone they can work with? I'm a big fan of making sure everybody gets their own special AI assistant. We're not using AI to replace anybody. We're doing AI to make people more powerful. And so everybody gets their own AI buddy, like a pet, if you will, like Clippy version 4, if you will, so that you can do much more effectively with that AI assistant, right? And so I like that kind of introduction of AI as an augmentation or helper for you. And then prepare your data so it's ready to be used. Make sure you get well-labeled data that you can assert is the pedigree of, it's well-balanced. Make sure your data is ready to go for AI. And then build in this idea that you want to be repeatable and you want to be ethical with what your AI is doing. Don't just field an AI and not understand the decisions and the impact it might make. On the other side, I've worked a lot with looking through what Microsoft's offered in this space to make it easier to do this kind of stuff, particularly on the data collection side. I'm a huge fan of Cosmos and the data lake capabilities because I have vast amounts of abilities to process unstructured data and label it in a certain way and get it prepared for AI. Huge fan of the Machine Learning Studio and Workbench. Downloaded that. I can run it on my Mac, which I love the fact I can run it in both places. And there's some really cool things I can do and get ready and learn myself and tell my people work on learning how to use Microsoft's AI capabilities through the Studio and Workbench. The last two are fairly fascinating to me from the technical perspective. Karina put up 2 conferences earlier. I want to put in a plug for one that's a little bit further out in September, which is Microsoft Ignite in Orlando. Very technical conference, and I went last year, and there were amazing sessions on how to do some of the AI capabilities on Azure, in particular the batch AI training. So for me, this was really cool. This was the idea at scale, I can run all of this training algorithms, run the data through the algorithms over and over again in a rapid way, and then also have a pipeline of doing that with a way to figure out how to do my development, my test, and my deployment to production of an AI model. So the thought process around it's not just an experiment, but something I want to operationalize is something you can do with the batch AI training. And then lastly, and not least, of course, are the cognitive services. You're mostly familiar with these, the ones that process speech and turn it into text, the ones that take text and do sentiment analysis or recognize intent, the ones that look at object images and can detect objects or can detect what mood is on my face. But also, probably less well known, is the cognitive toolkit from Microsoft. This is a really powerful language that underlies an ability to create AI algorithms. It's similar to Google's TensorFlow, but the really cool thing is I can swap that out under a library called Keras. And so Keras is a high-level AI coding language, if you will, and I can swap out the back ends whatever I like. And there's been some really cool demonstrations of how CNTK from Microsoft is faster than TensorFlow on many different kinds of experiments. And so I love that ability to take advantage of their improvements and just deploy it quickly when I'm doing something in a generic fashion. So with that, I tell people it's ready to go. You really have no excuse now to get started with AI. We can help from a definite perspective of the process of governance and strategy around what you're going to use AI for and when you're going to make the right decisions. I think you've got a lot of sources and capabilities from a technology perspective to do that as well. So I'll finish up there and see if there's any questions. Vishwas, yeah, sure.
So, great talk. By the question, where do you end up spending more time? The curating and preparing the data versus algorithm selection and tweaking? Where do you spend most time?
So it used to be I'd spend more time on the algorithm selection. What's cool is there have been so many advancements in speeding up the training. We're going to hear from NVIDIA later and some of the stuff they've done to really speed up stuff. With Microsoft CNTK much faster as well. I don't spend that much time on the algorithms anymore. I kind of let them all run in parallel and see which one works best. So really it's been more about, wow, how can I make the data even more informative for the algorithm so I can kick the accuracy up? Instead of running the model longer, it's what extra data can I add so the model gets even better. So it's more on the data side, I think. But that's not because I have more data, it's more because I want to do that.
Any particular presentation layer that you use or UI that's the output of all this?
Yeah, so a question on the presentation layer that's used for AI. Often people will do things in, there's a common method of Jupyter notebooks are common things, and those use a lot of the Python plotting libraries. I'm a big fan of things like D3.js, would let me be very flexible from a JavaScript perspective to show off stuff, so integration of D3 with Jupyter is common. So a lot of this is just how do I build the graphs to prove to myself that I'm being accurate with my output. And so a lot of that you can do in Jupyter, and I know the Azure Data Science VM has Jupyter pre-installed, so it's really easy to do that with.
I wanted to ask you about, I believe you mentioned it's Keras, is that there?
Yep.
Do you find that the federal government is interested in being agnostic with its AI backend, and so that would be good technology to learn, so that whether it's TensorFlow or Microsoft, we can switch out?
I think it's always useful to learn the low-level ones as well. So, I mean, personally, I know TensorFlow, CNTK, and MXNet are the kind of the low-level ones. Also, Gluon is one that Amazon and Microsoft are working on together, which is fascinating. Keras is handy, though, because it's a high-level language. It's actually easier for people coming into the field to learn. And then it has that added benefit of the portability, and you just flip a switch and try the different backends. Some are better than others for particular tasks as well. And so that's kind of a neat way to make sure. I know we try to do that because we want to give our clients options. But the fact that I can plug in the CNTK toolkit underneath and run it is super cool, I think. Anything else? All right, great. I'll let our next speaker come on up, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much.